I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT, and we are here at Cloud Field Day 15, where we are questioning Kubernetes. So, as many of you know, Kubernetes has emerged as perhaps the most important technology in cloud, and certainly the most hyped technology in cloud. And it seems to be emerging as sort of the de facto organization around which all discussion happens. And it sort of begs the question, is Kubernetes a conceptual framework? Is it a technology? Is it a product? Is it a platform? And more importantly, how real is it? So one of the questions that came up from our delegate panel here is the simple question of kind of crossing the chasm, if you're familiar with that term. Has Kubernetes crossed the chasm in enterprise IT as opposed to hyperscalers and as opposed to some other areas? When it comes to the enterprise, has Kubernetes crossed the chasm? Is this now the new vSphere? Is this now the new mainframe, whatever you want to call it? Is Kubernetes the real deal? Who wants to start with this discussion? Pumla.
I think it's the start. And it would depend on the organization that you're asking, right? Small enterprise versus large enterprise. Large enterprises take time to get things moving. The bigger it is, the slower it's going to take. So I do see it eventually getting there, but this at the scale that vSphere is in production, it's going to be a couple years. My current place of employment, we have it running, but it can't really talk about like the scale that it's at, but it's there, but it's not full mainstream yet. And it just takes time, upskilling, testing, all that good stuff that we did with vSphere, right? When we brought in virtualization. And for your small enterprises, I think, yeah, depending on if it's a startup and they don't have a lot of regulations, I could see them probably jumping on it in the big shop. So compliance and standards and controls they have to go through.
I think the critical question of any technology like this is it being adopted by new applications? If new applications are moving into this framework or orchestration or whatever you want to call it, if they're predominantly using this to deploy themselves and to use and work with, it's kind of like the PC. It's kind of like client server. It's all these things. When the new applications start to use a technology, over time, the old applications will start to move in that direction, or they'll remain frozen wherever they're at. So I mean, it may take years, like Pumla says, but it's there today. The only thing I've seen that it's complex.
Yes,
it's complex to use. It's got a whole new set of terminology associated with it.
More acronyms.
I have a good friend of mine is an IT administrator, the CIO kind of guy, and I keep asking him. He's using AWS millions of dollars per month, and I said, "What are you guys doing in there?" He said, "Well, we're doing this and this." Are you using Kubernetes? No, we're using Docker. I said, "Docker? Why are you using Docker?" The reason is Kubernetes is so complex. It's great if you have to have scale, if you have to be able to scale. It's really the right thing to do. But if you're not using scale, then Docker might be the right solution. So
ECS is probably still one of the broad to use. Like I've met a lot of clients and people are like, well, why don't you move to Kubernetes? They're like, we've got all of this pipeline, all of this automated infrastructure that's built on ECS. Kubernetes may do similar things, but we don't need it because we've solved the problem in another place. And it's an interesting thing. I like what you said, Ray, though, that until the applications can consume the infrastructure is not the important thing. And we get sort of wrapped around the axle of like, yay, new thing. But the app is what needs to use the new thing, not us.
You're right on point with the app. A lot of refactoring has to be done to the legacy applications in order to use Kubernetes. And depending on how old and your budget timelines,
Well, and I'm okay with that. I understand that, and that's the way anything like this is going to happen. Transitions are going to take a long time. But if I'm going to develop a new application today, what am I going to use? Am I going to use Docker? Am I going to use Kubernetes? Am I going to use the cloud? And the answer is yes, I think so. You would use Kubernetes today if you were developing a new application that you hope to conquer the world with. Whether it conquered the world is another question, but
Use the best service or tool for your business.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, but you actually hit on something important there is you develop the tool. And your first point of it depends on the organization. I mean, in our scope and in our realm, we tend to look at demographics in terms of number of workloads as opposed to number of organizations. And the reality of it is if we look at from the basis of organizations, there are far, far, far more small to medium businesses that the reality of it is they don't have developers. They aren't writing their own stuff. The reason why vSphere worked is it took that same paradigm where I'm going to have a white box application and I'm going to install it in this thing and I'm going to do it the same way. That's not feasible in the containerization and Kubernetes world as we look at it today. To me, what I keep looking for is that moment when we start to see these companies that are doing white box things, we're new companies that need to deliver applications to smaller customers and start using containerization as a way to develop that, to deploy that white box experience. So, I do set up a little Kubernetes cluster as an admin. The application is delivered via GitHub or whatever, and it's maintained through it as a series of containers. And that does happen some, but it's the complexity.
Yeah.
And it's not the,
Well, the answer to the question, but before a disclaimer, I'm new to Kubernetes, so shame on me, I'm an architect, I should not be new to Kubernetes, but I am in any case. But it depends. I mean, either on the dimension, as Puma told, of the company, either on the application. So about legacy applications, well, the ones that the company that want to that their products to go on, they will have to change it or rebuild it from the beginning, or I don't know, containerizing. Sorry, the legacy application. I don't think so. But the new applications should, to me, should be deployed either in virtual machines. So vSphere is not that, and on containers. So about again, companies, big or large, it depends on how do they use the containers. The small companies, when you don't have to deploy the whole environment at home on premises, and you can use the hyperscalers. Well, why not? So I'm a new one. The developers or the others, big ones, again, they can deploy it at home and then scaling up and down. So it depends. Across the chasm, yes, maybe, but it will not at the moment. It will not replace virtual machines vSphere. So it's not the new one.
To your point of complexity in small environments, if you need an application and you're a small shop, why would you use Kubernetes? It's so complex.
Yeah.
Find a SaaS application out there.
Exactly.
Right there, you're done, right?
Well, not only
you don't need to manage anything,
Yeah.
and you just go on do your business, operate, make money instead of having to manage this complex environment.
I think that's a deal, right? So if we look at I posted this online too. There's a link to the article about has Kubernetes crossed the chasm, and some of the links are kind of interesting, right? Because they show that from a CNCF survey, which there's no details attached to it, only 21% of the developers they surveyed are using Kubernetes. So let's get back to the basics. We are ops people. Our job is to understand what the applications coming over and the trends on the development side are, so we can be ready to have to build, suggest, architect best cloud the best cloud structures for our customers, which are developers. Only 21% of them are using Kubernetes. What are they using to develop their software right now? And I think those are the things we start to think of.
Nathan?
So I think the question is fundamentally flawed. If you are trying to compare Kubernetes with something like vSphere, that's not what Kubernetes is, and that's not what Kubernetes is trying to be. If you're trying to compare something like a pod to a virtual machine, that's a little bit closer, right? Because at its core, Kubernetes is an orchestration function for containers. What you said, Ray, about Docker, I think that's more on point between Kubernetes and Docker, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do in the Kubernetes world is we're trying to make it so that a developer doesn't care about other systems that his application is, his, her, whatever application is running on, right? So if I have a Kubernetes cluster that's running on Linux, and again, I'll build this cake every single day if I have to. At the very bottom of that cake is the kernel. That's what the application has to run on, right? And that application running on that kernel, whether it's, most of the time it's going to be a Linux application, it's going to be running on a Linux cluster. If it's a .NET or requires a Windows kernel, it's going to be running on Windows. Now, when we're talking about what this application is and where it's growing into, then we get into cloud native architecture and those cloud native inferences. So what is that? Well, when we move into the cloud, that's decoupled infrastructure, right? That's when we move into, okay, all these things are individual, but we're going to try to build them together in a way where it's a lot easier and more maintainable through something like infrastructure as a code or something like that. So I think saying that Kubernetes is trying to take on something like vSphere is kind of a flawed, and I mean, Kubernetes is never going to win that argument, especially since when vSphere hit the market, it was like 80% reduction in cost. Everyone's immediately going to adopt that.
I think the thing is that where you're going with this is interesting, but back in the early days of vSphere, no one wanted to adopt it because they did not believe it was real and they did not believe they could support it.
Mm-hmm.
Who wanted it were some of the developers did, because like you said,
It's the
where are the applications living and where the developers going to be writing the applications? The backup piece to it is how are we going to build it? But back in the beginning of the vSphere days, I don't think it's a comparison between vSphere and Kubernetes. I think you were dead on about this is between VMs and containers and how we manage.
See, vSphere, I thought the vSphere generation was driven by infrastructure and ops. I know the developer side, but we brought up virtualization, like, whoa, you can't bring that stuff in your magic. Like I literally had to sit in front of, application teams to convince them, like, this is okay. It's okay. You hug them and say, you'll be okay. Your server's gonna be fine, just because you can't touch it. But with Kubernetes, it's driven by the developer side, and you've got to hug your infrastructure and your ops team and hug them, let them know it's going to be okay. It's the reverse now.
Yeah, I'd like to put here some experience on Kubernetes implementation in different context. If you bring, for example, an application, if you bring, for example, a large enterprise that is simply use an application, probably the solution is not Kubernetes. In my point of view, Kubernetes is like a tool, and you must use this tool when it's necessary and when you're able to govern this tool, right? From my point of view, today I'm working in a software developer companies. In this company, we are producing software, and then the trend is use Kubernetes, yes and no, I can say, because there are several type of application, legacy application. I will not bring legacy application, use big application in a container. For me, it's overkill, and there are no. Let me say, it's not convenient. They are really expensive. From the other side, new application have a chance to be built as a microservices, and then things are changing. But we are producing software, so for our customer will implement our SaaS because we are producing SaaS. We are not delivering our software in our customer. And for this reason, the integration, we have enough stuff to build the application, maintain Kubernetes cluster, because Kubernetes cluster itself, it's not really easy to maintain. You need a prepared staff to maintain, keep track on updates, deliver the updates, move the application across many clusters, and so on and so. And yeah, one thing I want to say is that the developers is never using Kubernetes directly from my point of view. So we have a platform management team that is doing that for him. That we are automating every step. And Kubernetes without automation probably can be really painful to keep and maintain. Then we are moving on the next step. If in the company, for example, many startups that doesn't have a platform management teams, probably they are moving on serverless, right? Which is they are keeping a cloud provider as their main cloud provider, and then they are developing serverless stuff because they don't have someone that can manage their platform for them, right? This is so many experience I can bring with you. So
I love your point. Again, like if it's SaaS in the cloud, it is a no-brainer. But like Pumala mentioned, like for dev to convince the ops that are running on premises or hybrid workloads that they need Kubernetes, that's a really tough sell. From like the standpoint, there's a lot of complexity, and what problems are you actually solving to make it worth like the labor of bringing that into your environment?
So they're solving a lot of problems, actually. I'm going to speak from the developer standpoint here on this one, is that we do use Kubernetes locally on my laptop. And I think the tool set has finally matured to a point where it's actually faster for me to, first of all, containers definitely cross the chasm. Containers are definitely here. The adoption rate for containers, whether it's Docker, Docker Compose, or now Kubernetes, I think is the real reason why we're starting to even have this conversation at all. And the developer experience is where it all starts, is the fact that I can pull a repository and be up and running on my local machine, making commits to code within minutes, as opposed to the hours it probably used to take to set up previous projects where you got to get the right version of database installed, the right version of Redis installed, the right version of X, Y, and Z before you can even be productive.
I mean, but technically you could run containers and VMs. I know that's like a really horrible proposition, but.
Oh, you totally can. And I would think that that's where I'm finally sold on Kubernetes as being the way forward with this, is that I can run the same set of YAML files locally, and I can specify when I deploy into AWS that maybe instead of running the Postgres instance in my Kubernetes clusters, that I'm actually going to sub in RDS at that point. Or when I move over to Azure, it's going to be whatever cloud database there. I think the fact that I can now have that same exact experience, and by just changing a context, like one command line, I change my context, and now I can inspect tail logs at any point in the process. I think it goes a long way to giving developers more tools to help them triage, debug, fix issues. It takes a lot of that off the operations team, because they can give operations teams can now give appropriate permissions and levels of access into those environments. That you get to now scope these things so that you get kind of least privilege, and a really nice solution to a problem that was hard before. Did you just give every developer a shell on every machine out there and be like, great, go tail some logs and tell us what we need to tune?
Yeah, I assume you are using Minikube, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably the thing is that you are delivering on a developer laptop as a template, right? In order him to have to spend time to configure.
Oh, right.
Yeah, right. So this is a really power tool. This is the same way we are using, right? And after that, I suppose you are delivering your application through the pipelines to testing quality and then production environment, right? More or less.
No, but I think one of the goals though for me is someone should be able to pull a laptop out of a box, clean laptop, and be productive in under an hour. I want to commit code.
Yes, I think that's the beautiful thing about Kubernetes, that the spec has now become so ubiquitous, everyone's using it.
Yeah.
That's the good part. And like you said, containers have crossed the chasm. Kubernetes, not so much, but the tool set around Kubernetes
is beautiful.
Definitely. And so I think we're asking somewhat of the wrong question. It's not about Kubernetes, it's about the ecosystem around Kubernetes. It's all of the developers.
Yeah, because I'll agree with Ray that sometimes running on Fargate, for example, is a much easier way to throw up a single small app. But if you've got an operations crew that has gotten finally bought in on Kubernetes, it's just as easy now for them to use Helm and other tools. And I mean, we're even using FluxCD. We are doing GitOps in some cases for some of our applications where rollback time now is instantaneous. You make a commit, a pull request, it gets reviewed, it gets committed to the main line, and the magic just happens for you. Like I don't even think about operations at that point.
No, exactly, and that's why we see platform engineering teams or platform teams now being on the rise. Is organizations have A, figured out containers and Kubernetes are a thing, and B, it is freaking hard. And so we need new people to solve that complexity problem for us. They're building the tool sets around. They're building the developer experience, like you mentioned, instead of us, just using Kubernetes, because Kubernetes by itself is not a thing.
Right.
It does not exist.
The analogous version of it is like saying, is Tesla going to destroy they're going to take over the gas automobile industry? But Kubernetes will EVs take over the gas auto industry? Kubernetes is Tesla. It's just a brand of a thing. The practice and the pattern is what we're actually talking about.
Well, and
right,
The gasoline is everywhere.
exactly.
so let me refocus the discussion here back on the point that I made at the beginning, though. Has Kubernetes crossed the chasm? The question, and I think the next question we're going to take up is sort of what is Kubernetes really? I think that's the next question, because that's an important one, and I think that's one that we're all kind of getting around here. But let's go back to the point of this one, which is quite simply, it's 2022. Yes, enterprises are adopting it. Yes, enterprises are adopting containers and microservices and more of a DevOps approach. Does that mean that Kubernetes has crossed the chasm?
It's all about diffusion of innovation. These guys that back in the 50s and 60s talked about how agricultural technology were diffused out through farms and stuff like that. They've got this bell curve assumption of how technology is adopted. There's, really, really early guys, early adopters, major, late adopters, never actually will adopt anything kind of thing. So there's this bell curve, and the chasm is like the first two segments of that bell curve. If it's at 23% of developers are using Kubernetes, the answer is, according to the fusion of innovation, yes.
That's a yes. I think we are seeing that. And I actually want to challenge something Lino said about running a legacy application in a container. Absolutely, you should. You're going to use less resources than if you're running that legacy application in a VM on a machine, so we can actually compact those things even further. So I don't see why we wouldn't do that.
Yeah, so I want to build on that, because we always think, oh, we have to refactor the application. It's not going to be able to run in Kubernetes if we don't refactor it. That's kind of like, I wince a little bit at that statement, because it's like, I see what you're saying, and that is a best practice, so you're not wrong. But at the same time, there are tons of people out there running what I like to call, I'm getting the patent out there, but macroliths, which are basically these thick services that have multiple things jumbled in, but they're not quite ready to refactor everything. But they put it in Kubernetes, and now you have the control loops, you have the orchestration layer, you have the networking, you have all the functions within Kubernetes, which, remember, Kubernetes is just the orchestration above that area. And because they're utilizing it that way, they immediately get that accessibility. And so going back to what Ray said, I think we are seeing the adoption of Kubernetes. I think it is past that chasm. Will we see Kubernetes like 80% in the market? I seriously doubt that will ever be that much of an adoption of Kubernetes, because there are so many other competitors that are running Kubernetes behind the scenes, like SaaS and other solutions that will be out there that people will see and say, well, why would I use Kubernetes when I can just do it in SaaS? Which is absolutely ask that question, because a lot of developers, they don't want to have to worry about Kubernetes.
Will they service?
One would say that I think we're all right. We're all in violent agreement, just a matter of the level of it. Is that IBM's mainframe business has grown year over year for the past 5 years. So it has virtualization crossed the chasm? Has cloud crossed the chasm? Has it stopped the growth?
But the thing is, the reason the mainframe is effectively, quote unquote, stale or stalling is because all new applications lots of them are not going on the mainframe for some obscure reasons. They're going someplace else. Right. It's all the new,
On the
where are the new
mainframe.
applications being deployed. Where are they being developed? To a large extent, it's not on the mainframe. To a large extent, it's less and less so on vSphere.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
Why'd you trigger?
See, that's right. But what is Kubernetes? It's an API for compute, nothing more. That is like what it is, like the way in which it's.
No. Containers are a different thing. Containers provide an environment that you can control and you can deploy and declare and run this container effectively anything where you want. You want to run on this iPad, go for it. You want to run on this laptop, go for it. You want to run on a mainframe, go for it.
Oh, snap.
You can run
Oh,
containers
yes,
on
that's
network
absolutely
switches.
true.
Like, you can bring your apps right to where they need to be. If they're doing some kind of vital thing on the networking hardware or against networking hardware, they support on the backplane running containers.
Yeah, and increasingly in 5G and edge environments, you're going to see containers being run very close to
I have a
clients.
question. Did they have containers in the mainframe days?
No.
That's no. We are not going to get into this argument.
Fair.
The article that, so I'm just doing a little checking on the article that we're all having this conversation on. And the whole crossing the chasm goes by numbers. That's the whole premise of that article.
Yes.
This was what Ray was saying.
I cannot find that those numbers about Kubernetes in the survey that's linked from that. So I'm actually tweeting the author of the survey. But this is what product marketers do, by the way. But I can't find where that information is coming from. And so I think somebody made it up.
No,
And-
CNCF survey.
Yeah, to go into the CNCF, that's like going to dentists and asking how popular is flossing. Like that is the worst possible metric. Even
they do a
even if the
survey.
end is 20,000, it's
They do
20,000 people that go to
That's
CNCF.
my point. The point is we're having this discussion based on an article that pulled a survey number from and I'm looking at the survey and that number does not exist in the survey that's linked from. So that's the thing I'm trying to get to is like, we're having this argument, this discussion, talk about misinformation. Who said so? Who said all these
let me
developers adopted Kubernetes.
Then let me do it this way. Wrap this thing up. Rapid fire, lightning round, gut check. We're going to go around the table. Has Kubernetes crossed the chasm in the enterprise? Calvin, you get to start.
Absolutely. I think we're here.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yoop, what do you think? Has Kubernetes crossed the chasm?
No.
Who the hell knows?
All right, there we go. That's no.
No.
Absolutely.
What even is a chasm?
It depends. Maybe not.
I'm going to go a strong yes.
No. not
All right.
Ooh.
Because this was clearly and unequivocally an answer from everybody around here, the answer is yes, Kubernetes has crossed the chasm. Clearly, that's the result of our survey. Actually, Wolfgang, I didn't give you a chance to weigh in. Just say yes.
I'll just say no. It really takes some time.
Okay, so therefore, clearly the answer is yes. So